You know how sometimes you see two guys argue about abortion? Yes, that's what we're analyzing today.
Quick little disclaimer, do not send any hate, harassment, bullying to any of the creators mentioned in this video. Please leave it all in my comment section. I love the engagement and enjoy. A quick contextualization. TheSprouticus is pro-life essentially, and Xanderhal is pro-choice, and they're debating all of that. We are not going to discuss any of the practical, legal, policy considerations in my analyses here. We're only going to look at moral philosophy. And whenever I do include little clips of them saying something is legal or illegal, I'm going to treat it as if they are saying that something is moral or immoral. And the debate might seem a little bit disjointed here and there with my edits. The reason is because I'm only going to use the main points that they try to use to persuade each other. But if you want to see everything in context as it fully is, I will leave a link below.
Position, I'm pro-life. I don't think that abortion should be allowed. I think there are 3 exceptions to this rule, though, like I said. So the rule should be that abortion should not be allowed. The exceptions, therefore, should be in the cases of incest, rape, or a danger to the mother's health. I do not think that abortion should be treated as some kind of contraceptive.
What I do find interesting about the 3 exceptions that TheSprouticus names here, which is rape, incest, and when it poses a danger to the mother, my concern here would be that you can either say that life has inherent meaning and that is the reason why abortion should be illegal, i.e. all life matters under all conditions, in which case those 3 conditions do not seem applicable, right? I mean, whether the baby's conceived from rape or incest still doesn't detract from the value of life in itself. So that seems like a contradiction. Or alternatively, you could say, okay, conditions do matter, in which case intentions do matter, and then it strips the argument of the whole life has inherent meaning kind of thing, because now a context is brought into discussion. And if a context is brought into discussion, then you can make numerous other arguments for the conditions in which the child would theoretically grow up. So essentially, either Spartacus has to acknowledge that context matters or has to deny it completely. If context does matter, then life in itself seems to be a futile argument, and vice versa.
Make a hypothetical, okay? Let's say you get into a drunk driving accident. You decide to get behind the wheel while you were drunk, and you got into your car, you started driving home from the bar. Wasted as hell. You knew there was danger to driving. You should not have been driving. And you get into a car accident, and you wake up in the hospital now having been basically turned into a living blood bag for this person. They've hooked you up, and your body is now producing blood for that person. And the doctor tells you, well, you were there at the time, the person was losing too much blood, we had to hook you up, you were doing fine, you were just knocked out, and if we take him off of your blood, he's gonna die. You know, he's gonna die, so you now are giving him blood. Now, you are now in a position where you are providing, your bodily autonomy has been walked all over. You've lost your bodily autonomy in your sleep. Is it immoral to unhook yourself from this person? Like if you have a miscarriage and you're a mother, or if you get an abortion, without you, the baby would die.
Okay, great. Thought experiments. Yay. I absolutely love it. Okay. My biggest problem with this thought experiment in itself as a contextualization of the problem of, sacrificing your life to save another one is that when we're talking about birth, when we're talking about babies, we're talking about potential lives. The only morality to go on is inherent morality of life. When you are hooked up to an already living person, then the problem would be that we already know that person is, right? So if you're hooked up to a convicted murderer, and you might reach a different conclusion morally than if you were hooked up to a virtuoso piano player. So I would adapt this thought experiment to account for the context in which something occurs, right? So which life, because again, potential life, Or instead, I would change the argument to talk about inherent validity of life, in which case it literally doesn't matter whether or not you were drunk or did it intentionally or unintentionally, because again, the life itself is what matters, not the context.
Or if you get an abortion, without you, the baby would die.
So I don't think miscarriages are murder. In no way do I think miscarriages should be considered abortions.
Well, what about intentional miscarriages, like where you starve yourself and you make yourself malnourished and you have a purposeful abortion?
That's a different story. But that also involves intent, right?
Okay, class, make a mental note right here. We're talking about intentions. As you'll see later on, this becomes a very crucial point of contention for these two. TheSprouticus is essentially saying here that intentional miscarriages should be distinguished and can be distinguished from unintentional miscarriages, and the one is morally correct and the other one is morally incorrect.
But in your situation where you're talking about this person being like giving his blood to this person, and if he disconnected himself, the person would die. I think at that point in time, the person has two options, right? So this person has the option to stay connected to this person. Let's just call it 9 months, right? Let's say a doctor's saying 9 months this person will be healthy, and you can disconnect, and there won't be, basically this person's gonna be stabilized, and we're not gonna need your blood anymore.
So TheSprouticus here is presenting the conundrum brought up in Xanderhal's question, where if we completely simplify it, Xanderhal essentially said that you don't have a choice. You would just be hooked up by force to this person to save their entire life. And TheSprouticus is saying, well, you do actually have a choice, because you could, go to jail as the alternative, or as I'm presenting this argument, you just simply are immoral. So essentially, Xanderhal is saying the problem is that you are stripping somebody of the freedom of choice, and TheSprouticus is saying, well, no, you do actually have choice, just that you could choose to be immoral or you could choose to be moral.
So you believe that if you do something that puts another person's life in danger, you now have lost the right, unintentionally even, like you didn't mean to do it, then you've now forfeited your right to bodily autonomy?
So there's a difference between unintentional and intentional, right? So this person took the risk of drunk driving. They took the risk of being out there on the road being drunk. They then about took someone's life. They didn't because of 21st century medical procedures. This person now has the option to either kill this person or to stay connected to this person for 9 months, and they'll be fine.
Great. Okay, Xanderhal brought up the idea of intentionality, and here is my problem with TheSprouticus' counter-argument. Essentially, he's saying that you knew the risks and you opted into this process, so you have to carry the consequences. The problem with that is that we cannot actually assume in all cases at all times that there is no element of ignorance in the process. Yes, you can make the generalization that most people engaging in sexual activity are aware of any kind of consequences, but let's say there is a mother who was lied to by a boyfriend about some STD that he's carrying that could affect the child, like HIV and AIDS, for example, and now she's pregnant with a child who's going to have HIV and AIDS. That has just been proven. She only found that out after she was pregnant. Or in the law, we do have this concept called criminal capacity, which refers to the idea that you sometimes mentally are not equipped to make certain legal decisions or moral decisions, where, for example, an 8-year-old child doesn't necessarily have the clear conception of what is murder and what is not, so they cannot be tried as an adult, as just as an example. I mean, do we need any clearer example than the nuanced debate that's currently happening around Chris Chan? I mean, come on.
Mistakes happen. Robots make them, humans make them too. There's always that risk on both sides of things. Could be another driver, could be you. Just like if you're having sex with somebody, maybe your boyfriend doesn't pull out in time. Maybe the girl accidentally locks her legs. Contraceptives don't always work. No matter how much precaution you take, there's always that risk. But I don't think it is reasonable, pragmatically or morally, to say, well, then just don't drive. Just don't have sex.
At this point of the debate, they are returning back to the idea of intention, and Xanderhal is posing the idea that if intention is stripped, something happens by accident. And it should be noted here for the rest of this discussion that the TheSprouticus is arguing that intention does not matter. The conclusion is the same, and therefore morally it should be viewed the same.
The argument that it always comes down to is what makes the life and bodily autonomy of the baby inside of a woman who needs the woman's, placenta and umbilical cord and blood and all the nutrients to survive, to develop. What makes that baby's bodily autonomy matter more and come as a priority over the woman's bodily autonomy in this situation?
It actually doesn't come as a priority. I just think that baby inherently has the right to life. As written, I know it's not via the natural rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so what you're doing is you're going against that natural right of the baby to life.
This is so rich for discussion. Essentially, here we're discussing the natural rights. Essentially, we have to debate, is it more important the right to life or the right to freedom? The TheSprouticus is essentially arguing that, you can sacrifice some of your freedom in order to preserve the right of life, which is triumphantly more important. And Xanderhal is saying that they are equally important, therefore sacrificing the right to life is equal to sacrificing your right to freedom. And that creates the conundrum of whether or not abortion should be legal. That is, I think, essentially where they differentiate. I think the reason might be, and I might be wrong here, but I think the reason might be is that the TheSprouticus sees the sacrifice of freedom in the pregnancy process of the woman as a very small kind of sacrifice, because it's not, the pregnancy part isn't as significant, but that is stripping away a lot of context that involve financial means, it involves a support structure, it involves safety. There is a context in which somebody's pregnant, they're not pregnant in a vacuum. So therefore, the extent to which your freedom is influenced when being pregnant could be very different depending on where in society you are. But the reason why I think that is actually a valid consideration why we should care about the context and the choice and the freedom is because we are always talking about the potential life of the baby, not the already lived or knowing that it's going to be a good or an evil child. We're talking about potential. So we also then, by that same logic, have to talk about the potential of the pregnant person. In what ways is this pregnancy hindering the future of this woman who is pregnant and would have to carry this child for 9 months? In which ways? It doesn't have to be medical, it could be financial, it could be security, it could be career, literally whatever possible way that could have an ultimate net positive in the world, or net negative, again, we do not know.
Morally, I would say they probably do, but legally, the reason they do is because the outcomes of not having the father take some financial liability would be monstrous. We don't want more single mothers raising children in this country. That would be awful.
And I think the outcomes of abortion are monstrous. I think that the outcomes of moms just decide that their baby doesn't need the right to life, and that their right to comfort comes above their right to life is a monstrous idea.
In the battle of who is the biggest monster, what are we possibly going to say back to that? Literally here, context does actually matter. In some countries, it could be a fantastic idea to opt for adoption. In some other countries, we the country cannot afford it, and you are putting that child up for an adoption. It does seem evident that these gentlemen are not having the general concerns that women in third world countries have. But if I'm setting all feelings aside and we're literally just taking it, note how they both said or emphasized the mantras outcomes. The outcomes is so not the inherent action in itself, but the outcomes overall. And that to me is a hot take because we simply do not know the outcomes. We don't. We again cannot talk about a hypothetical future that none of us are in or know anything about. So I wouldn't even conclude here by saying that they should agree to disagree. I would say that they're talking about nothing. That's a nothing burger, my dudes.
No, I feel like that's desecrating the dead, but
yeah, we assign some moral wrong to even going against the bodily autonomy and the desires of people who are dead. at that point, it's not even discomfort. It's just this person said they didn't want this thing done to them before they died, and now even though they're dead, and as far as we're scientifically aware, they can't feel anything. They have, unless you believe in heaven and hell, but even if there is a heaven, I imagine, if they're in heaven or hell, they're not going to care about their organs being taken. And yet, as a society, we all agree that it's probably not good to do that, right? And
I love this point. Okay, and the truth of the matter is we can deny it all we like, but we do really care about the rights of the dead. We do care about what a living person wanted with their unalive body. Now, what I do think is an actual valid counter argument here is that the reasoning could be, as emphasized in the intention argument with TheSprouticus, he says that life has inherent value, and that could be the reason why we care about the dead body, because there was life in it. It does represent life, and we care about life. Or you can interpret the same theoretical question under Xanderhal's perspective, that freedom of choice is actually what ultimately mattered, and that's why we respect the dead, is because they made decisions while they were alive, and we still, are keeping that same energy. So I don't think necessarily that this thought experiment resolves their issue, but I do think it brings up a very interesting point.
But for the mom knew the mom knew the risks. The mom knew the risk going into it. If you read the birth control box, it does not say it's 100% effective.
There are many ways in which you could be ignorant, specifically when we're talking about minors.
Yes. If we want to make it super comparable, if it's outlawed and abortions are illegal, what would be a good comparison to getting the coat hanger in the back alley for unhooking yourself from the sky?
Yanking out an IV from your arm.
Nah, that doesn't sound severe enough. It would have to be like... you have to take like a knife and you have to cut out a chunk of your flesh to get the IV out. Maybe that would be a little bit more comparable.
I'm going to interrupt this argument by saying that I personally do not think that the severity of the act has anything to do about whether or not it's morally correct to do it.
Or a maximum of murder, or be there for 9 months to help this person get stable in the hospital. I mean, that is your option. You either kill this person, or you assist them through the medical process of healing, which would take 9 months.
Here, TheSprouticus made a logical oopsie, as I would like to call it, because he's saying that everybody has, in this hypothetical situation, everybody has a choice of being morally correct or morally incorrect, right? So you help save a life or you do not. But most important, it's a choice. You can be morally correct and you can be morally wrong. So if abortion is taken off the table, as you're not choosing to be morally correct, you are being forced. So the option of abortion is necessary in order to make the choice of not having the abortion.
This guy's taking as much of that as he can take, and he's just trying to make his trip. He winks for like half a second on the wheel and ends up smashing another car into a barricade. Do you think that person is should be morally have they done a moral wrong and killed?
Okay, here they continue to argue various types of reasons and excuses for people who get into car accidents. I do not see the point at all. And by that I mean that it's really not comparable. There are many external forces that could be at play. You don't need to be under prescribed drugs or something. It could literally just be a case of bad weather, or another driver putting you in a compromising position, or literally seeing a flashing light on the side of the road that you didn't expect. Literally anything could happen for a car accident. That's emphasis on the word accident. The reason why I would agree with Xanderhal then in the ultimate debate here is that it is comparable with regards to sex, in the sense that there are, no matter how many precautions you take, you can still, you can even risk STDs and stuff. There's always a risk involved. They're just more or less. So I don't think that really furthers the debate to hammer on this point, but it is an interesting consideration.
So do you not believe that intent matters when it comes to a moral assessment of a person?
When we talk about intent, if I would say this person intended to do this, I would charge them with murder. And unintentional would typically be, underneath the eyes of the law, unintentional manslaughter.
Well, yeah, legally, sure, and I guess we can agree legally that's the case now, but in your perfect world, and if you were the judge and you knew everything, and you were the one slamming the gavel down, would you want to send someone to prison for manslaughter because they fell asleep behind the wheel and they didn't mean to kill someone, but they did it, would you think less of that person as a human being morally? And would you sentence them to prison?
Morally, I would say that person made a mistake, and that person needs to pay for the mistake they did. And illegally, yeah, they belong in prison for unintentional manslaughter, of course.
Yeah, but at this point, aren't you just opening the floodgates for false rape accusations? I mean, if literally a lesser thought than myself could not have any access to abortions unless she pleads rape, you are like creating coercive circumstances. You are encouraging that. So I don't know how you're gonna get around that kind of dilemma in this hypothetical situation.
But part of my moral argument is you make mistakes, and the mistakes you make, you either get to, I mean, there's good mistakes, there's bad mistakes. I've mistakenly done stuff that were very good for me, but you get to reap the benefits or the consequences of your actions, whatever.
Oh, fantastic philosophical point just brought up by TheSprouticus. So yes, some mistakes are good and some mistakes are bad, and the idea of holding people accountable for the good and the bad mistakes. Let's say yes. Let's say I completely agree that that's fine. We hold people accountable for any level of mistake. We still need to determine whether or not it's a mistake. This argument or this position does not inherently imply anything against the concept of abortion. So, yeah, because again, if I'm going to argue that abortion is not a mistake, then that argument falls flat. If you instead want to say, well, you know, having had the sex is the mistake, then you would be saying that there are different rules and regulations for people who can get pregnant and people who cannot get pregnant, which would also pose some very interesting moral ethical dilemmas. And then finally, the idea that he made mistakes that were very good for him. I agree. Me personally, yes, I think many of us learn from our mistakes, but could you have learned with it without being punished? Is there a type of reform where you imagine do not emphasize punishment when you are doing something that is subjectively morally good or bad? Very interesting talking points.
So, if I was in a self-defense situation, and I did hit a person who was walking outside and killed them, yes, I would say that I should go to jail for manslaughter.
Anybody who's watched my channel before know that I am a diehard for moral consistency, and you know what? I'm gonna give it to him. He's at the very least consistent.
That impedes on my rights and my bodily autonomy. You're coming into my property, you're coming into my home, and you're trying to hurt me or my family, or take away things that I own. You're on my property. I have the right to put a bullet in your head if you're trying to steal my shit, hurt me, etc., etc., etc. So we agree there are cases where people have the right to take away another person's life because they are impeding on another person's bodily autonomy. And I bring that argument over to the case of pregnancy. Like,
I wonder if they ever considered that, you know, it's okay if it's not life-threatening, if it's not painful, even under those circumstances. Would it be morally correct or incorrect to have an abortion? Because if we start allowing for these extremes, if we start considering for them, then we have to go back to TheSprouticus' original position, where he said that there are conditions under which it is acceptable and it is permissible, and it's more of an unfortunate accident than, you know, morally incorrect position. So if you are doing the pro-life choose adventure journey you decided to go on, then fair enough. If you are of the pro-choice mindset and you fully commit to that, then it doesn't have to be this extreme to make your point. You could literally just say, well, I can and I want to, and that's it.
if you believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and another living thing is impeding on your rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, just like in the case of self-defense, you have the right to terminate the pregnancy, or you have the right to terminate another person's life, because maybe it may not be, I'm not saying the baby is wrong for this. I'm not saying the baby is comparable to a guy who's come into your house and is trying to steal your shit morally. I'm thinking it's more similar to the example that you agreed to of the trucker who accidentally runs over another car and kills that person. They didn't.
I'm going to use a different comparison here. Let's say, for example, that you have you live in a house and you have burglar bars, and you just don't like strangers in your house that are uninvited, and you don't want them there, and we do not want strangers in our house. just because we don't want them. There's no specific criteria, just me not knowing you. So for example, if somebody then walks into your house with the burglar bars and the door locked and everything, somebody climbs through a window or jumps through the chimney or whatever the thing is, and they're in your house, do you all of a sudden have to accommodate them simply because they are not pulling out a gun and threatening your life? Is that, do you have to do that morally? Do you have to allow them in? Could you maybe not just say, I do not want you here? Not anything against you, it's that I do not want anybody in my house that I do not. So then removing the conversation away from the idea of self-defense, so that it's not in a fight or flight situation, but rather just, this is my space, this is my autonomy, my ownership, my property, and I do not want any persons within this property. Then a person who is pregnant could argue that they simply just do not want a baby.
There we go. You could make the same argument that the government or millionaires or billionaires who have tons of money, who keep that money, are implicit in the deaths and the suffering of people who are starving and people who don't have shelter or home, and they ought to be morally impugned for that.
Yes, Xanderhal, yes, we love to see it. The point that I absolutely agree with here is the notion of implicit in the deaths of people, right? So, I mean, committing an abortion is an implicit murder, right? It's not actively deciding to end somebody's life, it's deciding not to start somebody's life. So yes, all abortions are implicit in the deaths, and if you are to be logically consistent, then every single implicit form of murder should be treated equally to the moral position that you hold over abortion, which, I mean, is just not practical. Nobody's gonna do that, right? You're not gonna say that it's mandatory for everybody to become vegans because, you know, murder is not practical. So what Xanderhal is highlighting here is that, well, basically you have to keep the same energy, I think, without even getting political at this point. You literally would have to keep the same energy logically to reach the conclusion of the pro-life position.
Okay, and so we're talking about the idea of a direct violation of the right to life and an indirect violation of the right to life. Direct and indirect have no connection to intention and non-intentional. As much as people might think that intentional would always be a direct violation of the right to life. Unintentional can be a direct or indirect violation of the right to life.
I make
so
the same
when you
case
have when you have a direct violation of the right to life, it's much different than when you have an indirect violation of the right to life, such as not wearing a mask. Is very much so an indirect violation of the right to life. I don't even think it's a violation at that point, because most of the time we talk about violations of the right to life, we talk about direct violations. We never bring up indirect violations because we know that how deep the rabbit hole would go if you start bringing up indirect violations of the right to life.
Okay, let's break down this direct and indirect violation thing about life. If I were to trace what he's saying from direct versus indirect violation to the right of life and compare that to intention and unintentional, then I would say, yeah, would indirect violation of your life include stuff like eating McDonald's daily, not exercising enough, not drinking enough water? Would it involve owning a gun, vaping, drinking alcohol? You know, these are all, you could definitely argue that all of those examples are violating a right to life for yourself. Those are forms of self-harm, right? Literally. So then we bring in the idea of intention and unintentional. So you know that all the things that I just listed are bad for your health. So is it intentionally and indirect? Does that make it morally okay all of a sudden? In which case, the previous way throwback argument made about that Xanderhal made about the miscarriages, where you starve yourself or you induce a miscarriage basically by yourself, that is pretty much as indirect intentional as it comes. So are both of those correct or not? So usually what follows in law and morality are more these direct and intentional actions. But if it has to be both direct and intentional, then the idea that accidentally getting pregnant or accidentally shooting somebody or drunk driving and accidentally, hitting somebody with your car, those are all unintentional but also direct. And you said earlier that if you accidentally shoot somebody and you didn't intend to, then you should still be held accountable for manslaughter. So these distinctions seem more like wordplay based, and at worst they seem to actually contradict what you said earlier.
So the argument that you're making is that if the woman gets an abortion, then she is taking away the baby's right to life. I would argue the baby's necessity to exist inside of the mother is taking away her right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
I have nothing else to say except this is a valid point. Kudos.
So I think, like, I think that's just where our fundamental disagreement is going to be. And it is that I believe that there's an order of the right, an order of these natural rights, and you don't believe there's an order of these natural rights. And I think that's going to be where we fundamentally disagree. Where I think the right of life goes above the right of pursuit of happiness. I agree with that. I don't know how you could disagree with that. You would roll with the right to pursuit of happiness over the right to life.
I would actually say that the disagreement is between the right to life versus the right to freedom. I don't think it's the pursuit of happiness, because in both cases you can argue that the reason why you are arguing for the right of life is because you believe that that ultimately leads in the pursuit of happiness. And I believe that the reason why Xanderhal is arguing for the right to freedom and bodily autonomy is because he believes that that is necessary in the pursuit of happiness. So I think ultimately you both want what you believe is best, which great, that is the whole point of a moral debate.
My TLDR criticisms are thus: TheSprouticus says that all life matters above context, but then provides context, so that's a logical contradiction that he would need to reconcile within his own worldview. And my biggest criticisms of the arguments presented by Xanderhal is that when we say that life matters above context, if that's the person you're trying to argue with, then it won't help presenting various forms of context. What I will add though is that this debate has been of an above average level, and I would seriously recommend that you go watch the whole video and subscribe to both of their channels.
If you for some inexplicable reason at this point wanted to know what my position is on the whole matter, then I would say, okay, if TheSprouticus is pro-life, Xanderhal is pro-choice, then I would say I am pro-abortion. I fucking hate children. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, then you are stunning, you are brave, you truly are that hoe over there. Let me know that you did by liking, sharing, comment, and subscribe. And other than that, I am out. Peace!
Bye, sisters.